Welcome everybody to JTEEN's April 2022 webinar session. We are thrilled to have you here today with a colleague, a peer, a friend, someone who I've gotten to know really well over the last couple of years and I enjoy working with immensely. Samantha Vinokur-Meinrath is going to present today to let you know about the book that she has written and share with all of us the research that went into the book that helps us better understand teens and anti-Semitism. I know Adam Blue is on the call and he did a whole different conversation about teens and anti-Semitism a little bit earlier this month. So we're thrilled to have Samantha here. If you don't know, Samantha is the Director of Knowledge, Ideas, and Learning at the Jewish Education Project. The most amazing title I think I've ever heard before. And her one claim to fame, and I know this from following her on Facebook or being her friend on Facebook, whatever it's called, is that she loves her puff. And you will likely hear at some point a bark or two. So just be prepared for it. They get super excited whenever she's on a Zoom call. But without further ado, Samantha, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. And thank you all for being here and for taking some time out of your day to talk about all things anti-Semitism. I do want to echo the dog disclaimer. I will do my best. They will not. And we will all power through. My very enthusiastic, depends on the day, either supervisors, employees in this crazy work from home space. But putting that aside, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk about #anti-Semitism, my new book, as well as anti-Semitism Bigadol, particularly in the teen engagement space that we all spend our time in. The impetus for this book really came about by accident. When I was doing my doctoral research at Gratz College, and I'm not the only one here who can say that, so shout out to Mike, who also has a doctorate from there as well, and perhaps others. I was interviewing Jewish Gen Zers, and I was asking them about their Jewish identities and what, if any, value add they saw Judaism as bringing to their lives. And one of the questions that I asked in trying to understand what connects teens or keeps teens from engaging in all of the amazing things that each of us are doing in the Jewish community, I asked them, describe a Jewish space. What comes to mind when I say Jewish space? What comes up for you? And they answered in all the ways that I would have assumed, and I, again, would assume I'm not alone in it here. Camp, synagogue, my grandma's house, the Starbucks where like the JSU club sometimes meets. Whatever it is, the spaces that they gather Jewishly immediately came to mind. And then I asked a follow-up question, expecting that I also knew the answer, but in this case, I was wrong. I asked, do you feel comfortable in whatever came to mind for you in the space that you thought of when I said Jewish space? And I thought that we would have the types of conversations that my millennial peers and I were having around Shabbat dinner tables. Am I comfortable in that my gender identity is affirmed? Am I comfortable in that my Israel politics are accepted as part of the mainstream? Are my domestic politics welcome? Can I show up exactly as I am? These existential questions about what it means to be welcomed and to belong. And instead, the answers that I got were, I'm going to say, heart-wrenchingly practical, much more to the effect of, oh yeah, since the shooting at Tree of Life, the synagogue that my family goes to always has an armed security guard, so I feel comfortable there. Or the day school in my community just got government funding for bulletproof glass. So it kind of sucks that we had to do that. I guess like that reminds me that I shouldn't be fully comfortable, but it's good that it's there. So that's a plus. And I started to realize how much the uptick in anti-Semitism in the United States, around the world, has really impacted the lived experiences of Jewish Gen Zers. how they identify, the choices that they make, the things that they're thinking about, and really how they're gathering. So that's what led me down this rabbit hole, to explore all sorts of questions related to and stemming from anti-Semitism. What does it mean for Jewish Gen Zers to be really the last generation that's going to have meaningful relationships with Holocaust survivors? And what does it mean as both a burden, an honor, a responsibility? What does it mean when we're talking about Israel and they're trying to figure out how Israel fits into their own Jewish identities, whether or not they want it to? How are we dealing with social media? How are they dealing with their parents? This is a generation that is really proud to say, I'm super close to my mom. My mom's my best friend. My dad and I are really tight. They like their parents. And how are they dealing with these questions of anti-Semitism, particularly for parents who didn't come of age in such a moment when anti-Semitism is on the rise in this kind of way? What does it mean from the left? What does it mean from the right? What does it mean? All of the above. And that's what I had the honor of delving into both pre and during COVID, which has also been just a crazy time to do research. So I wanted to first just share with you like a reflection piece from the beginning of the book, and then to share some of the key findings, things that the teens themselves said, because they are far more interesting than any of us, as well as some key stats. And then for us to talk about what does that mean for us, our work, et cetera, moving forward. If there are questions that come up, throw them in the chat throughout, interrupt me throughout, you and the pups. Or if you don't want to necessarily post it publicly, you're also feel free to DM and I will anonymize you, because I got really good at that during the research process, anonymizing people's direct quotes and questions. Okay. So as an educator, I've spent a great deal of time thinking about what success means for me as I share knowledge, experiences, and meaning-making opportunities with my learners. There are plenty of easy answers. I'm successful if they find meaning in my words and the lessons I guide them through, and if the experience is fun, and if when they think back on their Jewish educational encounters later in life, it's with some kind of positive feeling. I believe all of those things. But what drives me at my core is the goal for them to crave what is next. I never want my learners to be satisfied, to walk away from our time together with the mindset that they've somehow checked Jewish education off of their to-do lists and can now count themselves knowledgeable and move on. Instead, my goal is to leave every learner I encounter seeking more. I see my role as an educator as being that of sparking interest, connection, and next steps. I do not seek to provide exhaustive knowledge on any topic, and this book is no different. It's a snapshot in time at a critical and unprecedented time in American history. I've sought to provide multiple perspectives, insights from the breadth and depth of Jewish Generation Zers and those who care about them. There will inevitably be voices that are underserved, and while those omissions are not purposeful, my hope is that they pave the way for other voices to fill in the gaps, contributing their own stories to the unfolding conversation about anti-Semitism. So that's the caveat that I want to bring, that definitely did my best to be diverse in terms of who, from where, with what gender identity, with what sexual orientation, with what racial identity, all of the above, with what socioeconomic background, which is a part of Jewish diversity that I don't think we talk nearly enough about. I am sure I've missed a lot, and I welcome everyone's feedback in that space. So I'm going to first share some stats. Hang on. First, I have to learn how to share my screen because it's only been 2 years of COVID, guys. Yeah. Present, that was it. It was not share, it was present. We're good. Okay, so a few fun facts as of 2021. 90% of American Jews believe that anti-Semitism is either a very serious problem or somewhat of a serious problem. That's an enormous number. I don't know many topics that 90% of American Jews can agree on, but for that many to think that this is problematic, this is problematic. But only 60% of the general population agree that anti-Semitism is either very serious or somewhat of a serious problem. Now, 60%, I don't want to like be such a downer naysayer. Well, first, actually, it is a really downer topic, but 60% of people think that anti-Semitism is a serious problem. That sucks. I think we can just name that. But the discrepancy between the two is really what's interesting to me here. Yes, more than half of the general population is saying this is a problem. This is either somewhat or a serious problem. But at the same time, what does it mean that there's a 30% difference in how Jews are seeing and understanding our own experiences, and then how the rest of the world is seeing it? I think it brings up a lot, and the teens really reflected so many challenges in terms of allyship, in particular, what they're seeking and what they're being offered or lack thereof. So this gap felt super critical to name. Older Americans are much more likely to say that anti-Semitism is, again, a problem, with 70% of those 65 plus saying it, as opposed to 52% of those ages 18 to 35. So again, we have this arc of time of history. Told you it was coming. Hang on one sec. I think I did a good job letting everyone know this would be happening. So, okay, older Americans much more likely to name, acknowledge, recognize anti-Semitism. So there's a lot of work to do for our teens, their peers, and their immediate alumni, and the role models who they are likely to be looking up to in college and beyond. 1 in every 4 American Jews was a victim of anti-Semitism between 2020 and 2021. These are self-reported statistics. This could be anything from, I posted a video of myself on TikTok baking challah because everyone was in sourdough mode because COVID, and got hit with an anti-Semitic comment on my TikTok feed, to I was physically assaulted. So there's a whole spectrum of what being a victim of anti-Semitism means, but regardless, 1 in 4 is, again, a deeply harrowing statistic. And finally, the ADL's most recent audit of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States recorded more than 2,100 different acts of assault, vandalism, and harassment. These are, again, these are harrowing. These are a bummer. These are the numbers that recognize the world that our teens are coming of age within. So it's really no wonder that, I'm sure, again, I'm not speaking for anyone who hasn't had this type of experience, where teens are asking, where are the emergency exits when I'm in a Jewish space? Should I wear my insert, BBYO t-shirt, IDF t-shirt with whimsical Hebrew writing on it in public, or should I be making a different kind of choice? Should I stick my Magen David, my Jewish star necklace, into my shirt collar when I'm in like mixed company? All questions that they're asking, all super legitimate. So I'm going to share a few of the key findings that came through the book process, mostly from teens, a few from parents and professionals as well, on a few of the different overarching topics. First up is on Israel, because we always like to talk about Israel. So Ariel is a Jewish Instagrammer from Connecticut. When I interviewed her, she was a high school junior who is a self-described aspiring influencer. I don't know what the threshold is to go from casual Instagrammer to influencer, but she is working hard at it, and respect. So she said, I don't like that as soon as someone hears that I'm Jewish, they automatically bring up Israel. They're not one and the same, but they're not fully separate either. Ariel is someone who has an Israeli parent. She's someone who actually does have an incredibly deep personal connection with Israel, and isn't opposed to engaging in conversation about Israel, has feelings about Israel, is down to talk about it, probably much more so than many of her Gen Z peers. But at the same time, she doesn't want to be associated with Israel just by virtue of being Jewish. And this is the problem that she encounters on an all too regular basis. I think we can all picture that kind of teen. Next up, we have on the Holocaust. I get confused about other people's sensitivities regarding Holocaust imagery. When people said you can't call the detention facilities on the southern border a concentration camp, well, why not? If that's what it's going to take to get my parents, my aunts, or my grandparents to listen to what's going on, why not? I think that's a fine way to use our history. Mara, when I interviewed her, was a freshman at Binghamton, has the occupational hazard of being the child of 2 rabbis, so thinks a lot about a lot of different topics by virtue of her Shabbat dinner table and her upbringing. Her words, not mine. I'm not here to, say anything about rabbis' kids. But I think it really says a lot that she wants to talk about the Holocaust. She wants to use Holocaust imagery and sees it through this Gen Z universalist applicable lens, that yes, there's a particularism to the experience of the Jewish community and the Holocaust in particular, but ultimately, if it can be used for what she sees as the betterment of society today and tomorrow, why is that problematic? Great question on her part. That is the wrong direction. On making Jewish choices. So Ilana is a Maryland high school student. Currently, I actually interviewed her when she was still in 8th grade, right after her bat mitzvah, and we spoke specifically about social media. And she said, every time I see something anti-Semitic on social media, I feel like I have to make a choice. Am I going to comment back and get into a whole spam war over it? Or should I just let it go and keep scrolling and not engage? A lot of the time, like many of our teens, she's letting it go. She is not comfortable with what she's seeing in her social media feed. And we can all, I think, understand why. But ultimately, the prevailing theme, I feel like the actual tagline of this book could have been, I noticed a problem, but I didn't want to make it awkward. And so many of the teens who I spoke to really coming from this space of, I knew something was wrong, I knew something was off, but like to escalate it and be the one to call it out and make it awkward, way too much. And instead, in Ilana's case, she focused on unfollowing. The week that I spoke to her, which was in May of 2021, when there was the uptick in violence between Israel and Hamas, she was able to say, I unfollowed like 30 different people this week just as a self-care mechanism because I couldn't handle what I was seeing, but I didn't want to talk to them about it. On physical safety. So since the shooting at Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, we keep our voices down more when we talk about being Jewish in public. Be respectful of others. We are who we are, but we don't claim it as much. And this is the mother of 2 Gen Zers based in the New York area. And that to me was such a profound comment. We're just as proud of who we are, but we're not saying it as loudly. We're keeping our heads down a little bit more, being a little bit more circumspect about it, maybe being just more aware of surroundings than she would have been previously or that she would have encouraged her kids to be. And I think that speaks to a lot of what we're going to be encountering as our Gen Zers come of age and transition into and out of emerging adulthood as they're exploring what it means to own their Judaism publicly. Another social media piece in particular, I posted a video about making gefilte fish on TikTok, and people responded with Free Palestine. And then they said that they wished Hitler had killed both sides of my family, the Jewish and the Romani, in the Holocaust. Elisheva is again, Instagrammer, because that's how we define people now, who has an account that focuses on her own intersectional identity of being both Romani and Jewish. She lives in rural Ohio, found out about her roots a little bit later in life, and really wanted to showcase what it means to have these multiple backgrounds, each of which comprises such a key part of her identity, but had this moment where she was doing something, again, not related to Israel, nominally related to being Jewish because gefilte fish and culture, but really not a religious act, although we could debate Jewish food is religion. We're all there. Gefilte fish is not part of my religion, but we'll all come to those decisions, I guess, next week, more so. And somehow this turned into a political statement and an anti-Semitic incident, regardless of whether or not she wanted it to. I keep going the wrong way. That's fine. On Jewish identity, came back to Mara because she was just so awesome. My optimism has been informed by my Jewish values, the things that I was taught, and the idea that we're on an upward trajectory towards making the world a more whole place. That to me was beautiful. That to me was what we're all working towards when it comes to the work with Jewish teens, Jewish Gen Zers. I would love it if every single teen who or even half the teens who I've worked with over the years were able to say, like, the parts of who I am that are positive and that I love come from my Jewish values. So much the better. And we're seeing, again, anti-Semitism is not shaping every aspect of the Jewish experience, but in some ways it kind of is, because whether it's the example that I gave earlier of someone who's deciding, should I wear a shirt that has Hebrew letters on it in public, and opting not to because they're nervous based on anti-Semitism, that's one result. The other potential option is to say, because you told me not to, I am going to go find a Jewish star the size of a hubcap, tattoo it on my face, and you will not stop my Jewish pride. Also totally legitimate, also fine. Also a reaction and an identity formation moment happening in response to these external forces. Next up, we had a parent on Parenting Gen Zers who said that success would be if my kids see Judaism as an obligation, but not a burden in their lives. I see college students who will say they're only Jewish inside their homes and in these little bubbles, again, those Jewish spaces that they're able to name, but they don't want to put up signs advertising Hillel events or show their Judaism outside of these limited spaces. I want my kids to be comfortable being Jewish wherever they are. This is both a Hillel professional and the parent of Gen Zers. And that was huge for me as well. I think a lot of the parents and grandparents and caregivers who I spoke with really came from this place of, I want my kids to have comfort. I want them to feel confident in being who they are and be able to take it with them in the world. They were very reluctant and hesitant to quantify what exactly does that mean? What are the types of Jews you want them to be? What are the practices you want them to take on? They weren't necessarily able to speak or willing to speak to that as thoroughly, but were ready to say, I want comfort, I want pride, I want connection. And finally, this one was just like so wonderful because Jewish teens are the best, that a Maryland high schooler who I spoke to had said, we're a damn force to be reckoned with. And he was speaking to how much he feels that people of older generations, I think he was low-key calling all of us out, he believes underestimate Gen Zers, what they can do, and not just what they can do in the future, what they can do in this moment. Obviously, he was not talking about anyone in this room because we know exactly, and we are honored to be working with them and partnering with them in the co-creation of this future that they're looking towards. But I thought it was just an amazing quote and always want to give shout outs to include it. I'm going to pause my share for a moment. And first, just to ask, does anyone at this point have any questions, anything that I did not speak to or did not speak to clearly enough that you'd like to hear more about?
Samantha, hi, how's it going? Can you, and maybe you're going to talk about this later, I've noticed, and I'm sure many of my colleagues have also felt this, that like, you know, when we talk to our teens, they're able to have open and honest conversations. And unfortunately, they share some pretty horrible things with us about their lives, you know, and what people have said to them and how they kind of shrug things off. And I think what I find to be more challenging is when the parents come to us in the alarmist mode. What are resources or what conversations can we have with parents around these situations? Because as you showed with your research, you know, even though kids are experiencing anti-Semitism, they're also, they know who they are and they are secure with their Judaism.
Now I've muted myself. I think it's such a great question because I think it's really this dichotomy that we want to speak to, in the sense of, in every other aspect of Jewish life, we want to talk about thriving. We want to talk about value add. We want them to create personal meaning in the rituals and in how they connect to history, they connect with each other. And then as soon as there's a conversation about anti-Semitism, we dial all that back about 30 years of like, we need to be in crisis mode. We need to hunker down and teach them how to defend themselves and advocate for them. And I think a lot of parents are operating from that space of knee-jerk reactions of things that we can all understand. I want to protect my kid. And I'm worried that the mechanisms that are in place in other spaces aren't necessarily doing that the way that I would or I would want them to. So I think there's a few different things. And part of it is really figuring out how do we bring everyone around the table together in terms of following the lead of the teens while also pushing them if and when we need to. There are certain times where we want to respect their autonomy. If someone, again, someone that they're friends with in real life, whatever that means, is not a healthy social media presence for them, but they don't want to get their parents involved and have a training from the ADL at their synagogue, and like it was an awkward teen moment, totally fine. Let it, we can say to the parents, it's okay. And we're here for them, and we're fostering spaces of Jewish pride, Jewish joy, making sure they know that they have these role models that they can come towards to explore and unpack. Then there are the times where there's a reason to escalate. In Connecticut, I spoke to one student who basically described, I had never heard it put quite this way before. When I was in middle school, a bunch of the boys got into this white teenage Nazi phase. And I was like, never heard anyone say that, but all right. And she said, people were walking through the hall giving each other Hitler salutes, but they weren't doing it towards me. So I didn't know if I could say anything, but I'm the only Jew in my school. So how could it not be in some way about me? And the teacher had basically said, they weren't directing it towards you. So this isn't bullying. This isn't, anything in particular. Like, we can have a teachable moment about what are appropriate hand gestures, but this doesn't really count as anti-Semitism. It counts as rude behavior. And in that case, the parents, I think, rightfully escalated the situation, and were able to say, we need to talk to somebody else. This is not okay. This is not a safe environment for not only this Jewish teen who was coming of age, but plenty of other people in this space who would, have a lot of issue with this type of thing. I think when it comes to then the conversations with the parents, it's finding that balance. How are we talking about Jewish pride? How are we talking about Jewish joy? What are they modeling in these spaces? What are we modeling in these spaces? And how do we make sure that the time where we're having a conversation about something like anti-Semitism is not waiting to be reactive? Everyone can say, there was a swastika painted on my locker. We all kind of know that that's anti-Semitism, and everyone, I'm sure, has marching orders if and when, God forbid, that happens to one of our teens. We know who to call. We know who to alert. There are statements that ADL, Federation, etc., are ready to make in those moments, and assemblies and righteous condemnation. But how are we having the conversations when, God willing, this isn't the first thing on people's minds? Do they know about anti-Semitic tropes? Do they have a strong enough connection to their own Jewish identities that they want to engage in these conversations, and their instinct isn't just like, I don't feel like being different right now. Let's just shut this down and move forward. And the other part being, how are we cultivating allyship? And how are we working with our teens to connect not just with the Jewish community? I know several of us work in that space through different formal and informal measures. But ultimately, the comparison that I gave when I was talking to a group of teens about the topic was about something like rape culture, that it cannot just be that the method of fixing a problem, a societal, is to say, we should probably teach girls not to dress provocatively and get us. Instead, it turns into, how do we create a systemic change where a woman can dress however she wants, walk down a dark alleyway, and have confidence that she won't get assaulted. Same thing. We can't spend all of our time just saying Jews fix anti-Semitism, and instead to say society, anti-Semitism is a problem. How, in the same way that we are seeking to cultivate allyship for so many marginalized groups and populations who deeply deserve it, how do we include the Jewish community in that conversation as well? That was a really rambly answer, but if anyone else has questions at this juncture, I promise to be a little bit more succinct. Okay, so I have a quick to-do list then in terms of what we can do and what we can encourage our teens to do. And I'm placing it right now into the chat in terms of the Jewish choices that we're making and how we're inspiring them, as well as doing a little bit of educator self-care, because before 2 years of COVID, all of us needed a breather and some educator self-care. And I am quite certain no one's gotten it in the last 2 years. So first up is to figure out and name your needs. In the context of the teens, it's really what are they seeking? What do they want from us? Are they looking for support? Are they looking for someone to vent to? Are they looking for knowledge? One of the conversations that I had towards the very beginning of the pandemic was, as I think many people on this call know, my colleague was the first positive case of COVID in the state of Ohio. So I was the first person to go into lockdown as a result. And this individual had gotten COVID at APAC Policy Conference, where we had taken a busload of Jewish teens. And because somehow the Jewish community was the first one to go into lockdown as a result of this convoluted series of events, a bunch of high school students started calling COVID the Jew flu. I guess we can all respect like rhyming skills, and Jew and flu do in fact rhyme. And a bunch of the kids were laughing like, oh yeah, they're calling it the Jew flu. They did not have the context to say, what happened the last time Jews were accused of bringing a plague to the community and were associated with disease and pestilence and all these different things? It's called like crusades, pogrom, Black Death, all sorts of different allusions that one could make in that space. In that case, the teens needed contextual knowledge. Like they totally didn't have anything that would lead them to say this is anything other than a whimsical joke. So helping them figuring out and naming their needs. Are they looking for, again, someone to advocate on their behalf? Are they embarrassed to go to a principal about a teacher because they're worried about their grades, but an adult can take one for the team in that space? Are they looking for just like somewhere to vent? Again, another example that features in the book comes from this past May, when, again, there was the uptick in violence between Israel and Hamas, and the community that I was living in at the time had a rally in support of Israel. It was a combination effort from the Federation and the local chapter of the IAC, saying that we want to have a support Israel rally. Great. People came, people showed up. What happens for many of us when we show up at events? Accosted by moms is the key go-to. A mom came up to me and said, you need to go yell at my daughter. I was like, okay. Hi. I'm always happy to yell at your daughter, but like, is there some kind of context as to why I'm somehow doing this? Not, you. And she said, my daughter refused to come today. She said that she was only going to come to an event that was multi-sided and pro-peace, and that this is a biased event because it's not bringing together all sides, and she won't come to biased programming, and you need to go yell at her that and tell her this isn't a biased event. And then I had to like first awkwardly say, can't actually do that because she's not wrong. This is a biased event. This is a Federation Israeli American Council rally in support of Israel. I'm honored to be here. I identify as pro-Israel. I identify as a Zionist. I definitely have like more photos than one probably should, wearing like an Israeli flag wrapped around me as a teen and as an adult and like, you know, low key all the time, I am honored to be here in support of Israel. It is a deeply biased event and I can't yell at your kid. What I can do is invite her to come out for frozen yogurt and ask her what's going on that she's not willing or comfortable or able right now to be in an Israel specific space. We can have that conversation. We have a lot of conversations here, clearly, but anyway, she and I can have that conversation any day of the week, and I would be honored to do so if that's what she needs. And in that case, it was what she needed. We had an amazing conversation about why she was unwilling to be in Israel specific spaces at that moment, what would have to change in order for her to feel otherwise, etc. So all of that, naming needs. And again, for all of us, what do you guys need right now in terms of support from parents, families, the Jewish community, validation from the teens? Naming it, I think, is a huge first step. Next up is seeking out that support. For the teens who we work with, often it's connecting them with the resources of the Jewish community so that they know wherever you are, there is a federation, there is an ADL chapter, there is a concerned youth director, there is this world of Zoom and the internet where every resource can be made available to you. And again, there's a lot of adults ready to take one for the team, ready to call the school on your behalf without naming names, so that way you don't have to worry about your grade, ready to, you know, engage in a conversation or give you tips and tricks for doing so, ready to bring a diverse group of learners together to engage on a topic, all of the above. Fortify them and yourself. So again, I said recently, I taught this past fall a 16-week class on anti-Semitism for Jewish teens. And I think I was a little bit rude because at one point I said, I would literally rather be doing anything else. I wish that you guys signed up for a 16-week class on Jewish food, on Jewish ritual, on history, on music, on feminism, on like weird, obscure rabbinic texts. I would be so honored to teach a group of self-motivated Jewish high schoolers any of those things. And instead, the most popular class that we offered was learning about contemporary anti-Semitism. And so part of what I encouraged them to do was find some Jewish joy. Figure out, like, you can't sustain long-term a Jewish identity solely based on reacting to the other and being in this defensive mode or combative mode or proactive mode, all as it relates to this antagonism. Figure out what are the Jewish joy pieces that you can cultivate. Next up, speaking of cultivate, was to cultivate allyship. And I spoke to this earlier, and really giving them spaces to connect with their peers the same way that they are so proud and so honored to stand up as allies for others, to figure out, how do I do that for others? And how do I ask of it for myself? It's really awkward. It's really awkward when the majority of Jews are white presenting and are saying, yeah, someone like maybe made like an awkward comment to me on Instagram, but do you see what's happening to the Black community in my city? And is this really my moment? And like, is this about me, or should it be about someone else? And we are not here to play oppression Olympics. No one wins in these instances by any means, but to help them figure out, how do I fit into this larger world? How does my narrative fit into this landscape? And how can I be both proactive and reactive on behalf of myself and others? And finally, the education piece, to educate them and to educate ourselves, and to really figure out and explore, how do we respond? How do we understand, again, the what counts game in terms of anti-Semitism? How do we know where to turn? How do they know who they can go towards? And this is the teens, the parents, and ultimately ourselves as we figure out where we fall into this larger conversation. I'm going to pause again. Are there other questions, thoughts, feels about things other than my dog, who's now looking at me but refuses to go outside because it is in fact drizzling?
I have a question, and I was also having a similar dog-related needed to go outside issue, so I'm glad that I was able to virtually. Thank you for everything so far, and I think that one of the most relatable things you said is just the onslaught by parents, and so often this question of what do I say, or what does my kids say, or even I think from the teen side of things, again, to hear that the anti-Semitism class was the most popular. In my interactions with teens, I often find that they want to learn about anti-Semitism, or they want to learn about facts, or they want to learn about Israel, so that they can know that they're right, or that they can be validated that they're like on the right side of things. And I find that this often comes into conflict with that desire from parents to create fighters. And I don't know if I'm using the right language, because I've often referred to it as addressing trauma that teens experience from dealing with anti-Semitism. And I get a lot of pushback from older generations who are saying, like, we don't want to coddle them, or we don't want to like play into this like victimhood mentality. We want them to like feel empowered to. And I'm wondering, in your experiences, how you've again, I think the anecdote about working with that one student, in a more learner-centered area, I'm wondering what kind of language you've used, or what kind of experiences you've had that have helped you to convey that the teens need to a generation that doesn't get it.
Sorry, you cut out on my end for the last part, that lead to a generation that what? Sorry.
A generation that doesn't seem to get it, that wants fighters but doesn't know how to empower students in their own voices. I'm wondering what language works.
I think the language of empowering is ultimately what we're seeking, to figure out how to show them that each of these teens has a narrative, and that trauma and victimhood don't have to be the same thing. I think there's a real reticence to ever think of Jews, and especially, again, your kids, your grandkids, God forbid, as being weak, and as being the victims. We don't see ourselves in that way. And Gen Zers don't see themselves in that way. This was like a really fascinating through line. They like being minorities. They think it's so cool to be something different, something unique, something not necessarily part of the mainstream. And that there's a difference for them in how they see, again, minority status versus victimhood status. But the trauma is real. The trauma is real as soon as you have a middle school aged student who is trying to make decisions about, should I make sure that I have like a non-Jewish friend, so I have somewhere to go in case things get bad? As soon as you're having that conversation, there's trauma. They might not be the victim of anything. God willing, they are not the victim of any kind of hate crime or anti-Semitism, but there's trauma. There is, as of 2021, there were over 2.5 billion views on TikTok of like nose job videos. That's not anti-Semitism on the face of it, because everyone can view nose job videos. But if you want to have the conversation about what does it mean to be pretty, what does it mean to feel good, and how many Jewish kids either are questioning their nose, their hair, in terms of the mainstream societal assumption of what's pretty, they're not victims of anything, but it's causing them to have to think in a different way than we would want them to. And I think giving parents and grandparents a space to say, you didn't do anything wrong. This is not that because we didn't turn them into fighters, because you didn't light Shabbat candles enough, therefore they don't know, and therefore they don't care, and they're going to assimilate, all of these like escalating insecurities that these generations might have. Instead, to figure out, how do we empower them to make Jewish choices? How do we empower them to be able to articulate, what does it mean actually to me to be Jewish? So that when someone comes up to me and says, oh, is Purim the Jewish Halloween? Again, that's not anti-Semitic. That's something that I think many people have heard, but to be able to say, rather than just like, yeah, that's the one where it's the Jewish Halloween. Actually, what is this? And what's my connection with it? And how does my Judaism bring me joy and bring me these unique qualities, as opposed to being simply reactive to a culture around me?
Thank you.
All right, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So I'm placing into the chat my key links in terms of the website, email address, and Instagram. The book, for anyone who feels so inclined, is available as an ebook right now, because who knew in COVID, there's a global paper shortage as part of all of the supply chain issues, but the print copy is coming out end of May. And if you message me either any of these forums, I am able to offer it at a 40% discount, both for individual as well as group rates, which is the like gimmicky salesy part. So I apologize for even saying it, but I'm excited to be able to offer it at that rate when it feels relevant. In the meantime, unless other questions come up, I am happy to hang on, but I also want to just thank you guys all for your time and your patience with the pups and throughout today. And thank you to Erica.
Beautiful. So I'm putting in the chat really quick. Samantha, are you going to put the link for the book in the chat, or they can find it at your
through? Because right now, if you go to the publisher's website, guys, the publishing world is crazy. So if you go to the publisher's website, so far, all you can do is find something that says coming soon. If you go to Amazon, you can pre-order, but without the discount code. And I like all of you, so feel free to message me directly and we will take care of all of the above.
Perfect. And if you guys want more information about JTEEN, or you want to access any of our prior recordings, either from our webinars or from past conferences, it is all online. Samantha, thank you so much for donating your time, your expertise. I know the information was really important, and I look forward to having more conversations about this and really talking about the quotes from the teens and from the community that you spoke with, because I think that really brings it home and makes it real. So thank you. We look forward to new news from you in the very near future. And if anybody else wants to ask any questions, I think we're good. Amazing. You got lots of thank yous in the chat. And that's it for us today. So thank you all so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Have a great rest of your day.